I booked a small Airbnb apartment on the edge of Midwestern River Town in late October 2019 because it was cheap, quiet, and close to the archive where I planned to spend a week scanning old records. The listing showed a converted upper floor of a brick duplex with tall windows, clean lines, and a narrow kitchen. The photos were tidy but distant. No personal touches. That felt right. I wanted a place that felt unused. I arrived after dark and steady rain, the kind that flattens sound and makes streets feel empty even when cars pass. The key was in a lockbox. I let myself in, closed the door, and noticed how the air felt trapped, like it had been sealed for a long time. The apartment was warmer than expected. The heat was on high. I turned it down and walked through each room. One bedroom, one bathroom, a living area with a desk pushed against the far wall. Everything looked clean, too clean. The floors had no scuffs. The counters had no marks. The couch cushions were firm and used. I unpacked, ate a sandwich I brought with me, and went to bed early because the drive had been long. The building creaked through the night in a way that felt normal for an old place. Pipes ticked, radiators breathed. I slept lightly, but without fear. The next morning, daylight made the place feel smaller. I noticed the ceilings were lower than they appeared in the photos. The windows looked into an alley and a parking lot behind a hardware store. From a bedroom, I could see the edge of the roof line across the way and a drain pipe with rust streaks. I left early, worked all day, came back after sunset. The heat was back up when I returned. I turned it down again. I assumed it was on a schedule. That night, I noticed the first odd detail. The bathroom mirror had a faint smudge at eye level that looked like a handprint had been wiped away. I cleaned it with a towel. It came clean easily. I dismissed it as residue from cleaning. I showered, dried off, and went to bed. On the third day, I stayed late at the archive and returned close to midnight. The rain had stopped. The air was cold. When I unlocked the door, I smelled something sour beneath the usual stale warmth. I checked the fridge. It was empty. I checked the trash. Nothing. The smell faded after a few minutes. I opened a window and sat at the desk to organize files. As I worked, I felt a pressure behind my eyes like someone was standing close. I shifted in my chair and kept going. I blamed fatigue. Around 1 in the morning, I heard a soft sound from above the bedroom ceiling. It was not a step or a thud. It was a scrape, slow and careful, followed by a pause. The building had an attic. Old places did. Animals could get in. I listened. Nothing followed. I slept with the light on. The next morning, I noticed dust on the bedroom floor that had not been there before. Fine grit near the baseboard like old plaster. I swept it up. I looked at the ceiling. It was intact. No cracks. No stains. I left again for work. That evening, I decided to cook. As I stood at the stove, I felt a draft brush my neck. The windows were closed. The door was shut. The vent above the stove was off. I stood still and felt it again, faint and cold, like air moving through a narrow gap. I followed it across the living area to the wall behind the desk. There was a bookshelf bolted there, shallow and empty. When I put my hand near the shelf, the draft stopped. When I pulled it away, it returned. I pressed against the shelf. It did not move. I did not investigate further. I ate, cleaned up, and tried to focus on work. That night, the scrape came back. It moved along the ceiling line, stopped above the bed, then retreated. I lay still and counted my breathing until morning. On the fourth day, I noticed the lockbox on the door had fresh scratches. Thin lines around the code wheels, as if someone had tried combinations quickly. The code still worked. I assumed a previous guest had been careless. I told myself that was enough. That afternoon, while packing papers into my bag, I found a small screw on the desk that had not been there before. It was short, silver, with drywall dust on the threads. I held it and felt my pulse quicken. I searched the apartment carefully. I checked the smoke detector. It was intact. I checked vents. They were fixed. I checked the bathroom fan. Nothing loose. When I returned to the bedroom, I noticed the bookshelf again. I ran my fingers along the top edge and felt a seam I had not noticed. The shelf was a panel. It was flush with the wall, but not fixed. I pressed and felt it give. Behind the panel was a narrow cavity between studs. Inside, a wooden ladder ran upward into darkness. The smell from the other night was stronger there, old sweat and damp wood. The ladder rungs were worn smooth in places. Above, I could see the underside of the ceiling and a narrow crawl space extending the length of the apartment. There were thin gaps cut into the plaster above the bedroom and bathroom, covered with mesh painted the same color as the ceiling. They were nearly invisible from below. I stepped back and replaced the panel. My hand shook. The explanation formed quickly and clearly, without any need for imagination. Someone had access to the crawl space. Someone had been moving above me. The heat being turned up made sense. Warm air rose. Sound traveled. The smudged mirror made sense. The draft made sense. The screw made sense. I packed everything I owned into my bag in under 10 minutes. I did not shower. I did not sit. I kept the lights on and my back to the wall. Before leaving, I took photos of the panel, the ladder, the gaps in the ceiling. I left the key on the counter and walked out into the cold. I stayed in a motel that night. In the morning, I reported everything through the platform with photos attached. I also contacted the local police and gave a statement. An officer met me later that day at the apartment. The owner was contacted. Access to the attic was found from the other unit in the duplex. The ladder matched were patterns. The crawl space showed recent disturbance, compressed insulation, and food wrappers hidden near the far end. There were no cameras found, but the gaps were positioned to give a clear view of the bed and shower. The owner claimed ignorance. The other unit was listed as vacant. Records showed it had been used irregularly. The case was handed off for further investigation. I was refunded and relocated by the platform. Weeks later, I received a brief update that charges had been filed related to unlawful surveillance and trespass. No names were shared. What stayed with me was how ordinary the place had been. The danger was not sudden. It was built into the walls. It relied on routine, on my need for quiet, on my habit of explaining things away. Every sound had a reason until it did not. The ending was not dramatic. It was procedural. Locks changed. Listings removed. Reports filed. I finished my work from home. I no longer book places that feel unused. I choose rooms with signs of life, scuffed floors, mismatched furniture, proof that people exist at eye level, not above it. This happened in September 2020, during the stretch of the year when time felt loose and plans kept shrinking. 4 of us rented a remote place near the Appalachian foothills because we wanted space and darkness. The listing leaned hard on the idea of stargazing. No streetlights, no neighbors, clear skies. We had all been indoors for months. The idea of standing in an open field and looking up felt like relief. The drive there thinned out fast. Paved roads turned to gravel, then to a dirt track with deep tired roofs. Trees crowded close on both sides. Cell service dropped and never came back. The house sat alone at the end of the track, a low cabin with a wide deck facing the woods. It looked clean and recently maintained. Fresh stain on the boards. New screens on the windows. The inside smelled like pine cleaner and nothing else. We unloaded in daylight. Everything seemed normal. 2 bedrooms, a small loft, a basic kitchen. No personal items. No signs of the owner staying there. That did not bother us. Remote rentals are often like that. The quiet felt pleasant at first. You could hear the wind through the leaves and distant insects. It sounded alive. As the sun dropped, we ate outside and watched the sky darken. The stars came out sharp and bright, more than any of us were used to. The Milky Way showed as a pale smear overhead. We turned off the porch light and stood in the yard, letting our eyes adjust. That was when I noticed the quiet changing. At first, it was subtle. The insects slowed. The background sound thinned. Within minutes, it stopped entirely. No crickets, no cicadas, no rustle of leaves. The wind died too, though the air did not feel heavy. It felt hollow, like sound had been turned down rather than removed. We commented on it in passing, then shrugged it off. Weather shifts happen. Insects pause. We lay back on the grass and kept watching the sky. The silence stretched. It became hard to place distance. Without sound, the woods felt closer, like a wall rather than a space. The first voice came from far away, somewhere past the tree line. It sounded like one of us, carried thin through the dark. It was faint enough that I thought I imagined it. A few seconds later, it came again clearer. It said a name. One of my friend's names, but wrong. The ending sound was off, like someone guessing. The voice was not loud. It did not shout. It carried the way a voice does when someone calls out across a field, expecting an answer. The tone was flat. No emotion. Just the sound shaped into something familiar. We stood up slowly. No one laughed. No one moved toward the sound. The woods stayed silent after it stopped, deeper than before. I felt my skin tighten along my arms. My mind ran through simple explanations. Another group hiking. Someone at a distance hearing us earlier and trying to get attention. Sound traveling strangely at night. Then the voice came again. This time it used another name, also wrong by a small margin. A syllable missing. A vowel shifted. It sounded closer, though that might have been the lack of background noise playing tricks on us. It still came from the woods, not the road. We backed toward the house without speaking. The deck boards creaked under our feet, loud in the quiet. Once inside, we locked the door and turned on the lights. The cabin felt small with all four of us standing in the living room, listening. The voice did not come again right away. Minutes passed. We tried to settle, to breathe normally. Someone checked the windows. Someone else checked the back door. Everything was closed. The silence outside stayed unbroken. When the voice returned, it did not try to sound like any of us. It used the same wrong version of the first name again, stretched longer this time, like it was testing how it sounded. The distance felt shorter. Not close, but not far either. Somewhere at the edge of the trees. No animals moved. No insects resumed. The forest stayed still in a way I had never experienced before or since. I had grown up around woods. I knew what quiet sounded like. This was different. This was absence. We turned off the lights inside the cabin and looked out through the windows. The yard lay pale under starlight. The tree line looked flat and black, no depth to it. The voice did not come while we watched. It came when we stepped away. It used a third name then, also wrong. Each attempt sounded slightly more confident, like the speaker was narrowing something down. There was no laughter, no whispering, no footfall noise to suggest movement. Just the voice, appearing and disappearing. We stayed inside until sunrise. No one slept. We sat with our backs to the walls and watched the doors. As the sky lightened, the insects returned all at once. Crickets started up like nothing had happened. Birds followed. Wind moved through the leaves again. The woods gained depth and texture. The silence broke and never returned. In the morning, we walked the property. We found no tracks near the cabin, but the ground was hard and dry. Beyond the cleared yard, the woods were thick with undergrowth. Visibility dropped fast. Sound would carry unevenly there, especially at night, especially if the air cooled quickly. Later, after we left, one of us contacted the host to mention the voices. The response brushed it off as misheard echoes, framed as a common experience in the area. That explanation stayed with me because it did not fit. Echoes need surfaces and space. They repeat what is given to them. They do not change names. They do not adjust sounds. They do not pause and resume with intent. Deadwoods do not echo. They swallow sound. The explanation that made sense came weeks later after I read about how sound carries during temperature inversions. At night, especially in early fall, cool air can settle near the ground while warmer air sits above it. Sound bends back down instead of rising. Voices travel farther and clearer than expected. A person far away can sound close. A person hidden can sound unplaced. There were also seasonal hunters in that area. Not hunting animals that time of year, but scouting land, checking boundaries, moving at night to avoid attention. People who know how to stay still. People who listen before they speak. If someone heard us talking earlier, they could have picked up names without context. If they tried to call out, they might have gotten them wrong. The wrongness could come from distance and unfamiliarity, not from anything else. That explanation fits the facts without adding anything extra. It explains the voices. It explains the silence, which can happen when predators or unfamiliar humans enter an area. It explains why the voice never came close enough to place, and why it stopped by morning. What it does not explain is the feeling of being studied, not chased. The sense that the voice was not meant to get a response, only to check for one. That part stays with me because it does not need a supernatural answer to be unsettling. It only needs another person in the dark, choosing not to be seen. I still think about that night when places go quiet around me. I listen for the return of sound more than its absence. Silence itself does not scare me anymore. Silence that feels controlled does. I booked the Airbnb after my car broke down during a long drive. I was supposed to make it to another city that night, but the repair shop couldn't fix the issue until morning. I didn't want to sleep in my car, and the nearest hotel was full because of some local event. The Airbnb listing showed up as available immediately. It was a basement apartment attached to an older house in a quiet residential area. The host had good reviews. Nothing alarming. I just needed a place to sleep. I arrived around 8:30 p.m. The neighborhood was silent. No kids, no traffic, no porch lights except the one on the house I was staying at. The house itself was large and old, 2 stories, with dark siding and a steep roof. The basement entrance was on the side, down a set of concrete steps. A single bulb lit the stairwell. The light flickered slightly, but stayed on. The door opened with a key from a lockbox. When I stepped inside, the smell hit me immediately. Not bad, just heavy, like damp concrete mixed with cleaning chemicals. The ceiling was low. I could touch it if I raised my arm. The space was clean, but clearly a basement. Painted cinder block walls. One small window near the ceiling covered by thick blinds. The furniture was simple. A bed, a couch, a small table, a TV mounted to the wall. The host instructions said the upstairs unit was occupied, but that the basement was fully private. I reminded myself of that while unpacking. I didn't expect complete silence in a basement unit, but it was quieter than I thought it would be. I couldn't hear anyone upstairs at all. I checked the bathroom. Clean towels folded neatly. The shower worked. The drain was slow, but I didn't think much of it. I locked the door and tried to relax. That night, I slept lightly. The mattress was thin, and the room stayed cold even with the heater on. Around midnight, I woke up because I felt pressure change in the room, like someone had opened a door somewhere nearby. I listened for footsteps upstairs. Nothing. I checked my phone. No messages. No alerts. I went back to sleep. In the morning, I noticed the blinds on the small window were crooked. I remembered adjusting them the night before so no light would come in. Now they were bent upward slightly, letting a thin line of daylight through. I told myself they must have shifted. I left early to check on my car and returned around noon. When I unlocked the basement door, the air inside felt warmer than before. The TV was off. The lights were off, but the couch cushion was indented in a way that didn't match how I left it. I stood still for a moment, listening. I heard faint movement above me, slow and deliberate. Someone walking upstairs. That made sense. The house wasn't empty. I went about my day, but I felt uneasy. I started noticing details I had ignored before. Scratches near the door frame, low and shallow, like something heavy had been dragged across it multiple times. The bathroom vent looked newer than the rest of the room, but it was installed crooked. One screw was missing. That evening, I locked the door and placed my backpack against it. Not because I was scared, but because it made me feel better. I made food and sat on the couch. The basement felt sealed, like air didn't move properly. The heater clicked on and off. Around 10 p.m., I heard something behind the wall near the bed. Not pipes, not water. It sounded like fabric brushing against wood. Slow, then nothing. I didn't sleep much. The next morning, I found mud on the bathroom floor near the shower. I hadn't gone outside since returning the day before. The footprints were faint, but clear enough to see. Bare feet, large. My heart started racing, but I forced myself to stay calm. I checked the door, still locked. I checked the window, still shut. The blinds were bent again, worse this time. I packed my things, but before leaving, I decided to check one more thing. The vent in the bathroom ceiling. I stood on the toilet and pushed on it gently. It moved more than it should have. I unscrewed the remaining screw and lifted the cover slightly. Behind it was darkness and a smell that made my stomach turn. Sweat, old food, something rotten. I shined my phone flashlight inside. There was a narrow space above the ceiling, just enough room for someone to crawl. I could see scuff marks and dirt pressed into the insulation. Further back, something reflective caught the light. A bottle, then another. I stepped down and backed away. As I turned toward the door, I heard movement upstairs. Faster this time. Heavy footsteps crossing the floor directly above me, then stopping. I didn't wait. I grabbed my keys and opened the door. As I stepped outside, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. A second set of footprints in the dirt near the stairs, leading away from the basement entrance and toward the back of the house. I got into my car and left immediately. Later that day, I reported everything through the app. The host account stopped responding. The listing was removed within 48 hours. Out of curiosity, I searched public records for the address. I found an old news article from several years earlier. A man had been arrested for secretly living inside houses he rented out, using crawl spaces and attic access to avoid detection. He targeted basement units and older homes. The charges were dropped due to lack of evidence after he claimed he had permission. I don't know if it was the same person. I don't know if someone was living in that ceiling while I slept. But I know what I saw. I know what I smelled. I know the space above that bathroom wasn't empty. Now, whenever I stay somewhere unfamiliar, I don't just check the locks. I check vents, ceilings, and corners that don't feel right. Because I learned that sometimes the danger isn't outside the door. Sometimes it's already inside the walls, waiting quietly, counting on you not to look up. I was 3 days into a cross-country drive for a new job and running on habit more than thought. Wake up before sunrise. Coffee for whatever gas station looked clean. 8 to 10 hours behind the wheel. Music low. Phone face down. I booked the place while stopped for fuel, choosing it because it was cheap, close to the highway, and available that night. One night only. I needed sleep more than comfort. The house sat at the edge of a quiet town I barely registered. Single story. Fresh paint. Gravel driveway raked smooth. No personal touches on the porch. Inside, everything looked new but unused. White walls without marks. Couch cushions sharp at the edges. A small table centered perfectly on a rug with no signs of wear. The place smelled faintly of cleaning spray and nothing else. Not even dust. It felt less like a home and more like a model unit. I dropped my bag near the door and walked through every room. Bedroom neat. Bed made tight enough to bounce a coin. Bathroom towels folded with corners aligned. Kitchen cabinets empty except for a few matching mugs lined up by height. No photos. No mail. No signs anyone lived there. I noticed that right away but did not dwell on it. Hosts sometimes keep rentals bare. I ate a protein bar, showered, and lay down fully clothed for a few minutes just to rest my back. The silence felt thick, not peaceful, controlled. I got up and locked the door, even though the town looked harmless. I pulled the curtains closed, though there was nothing outside but darkness and a fence. I slept hard. No dreams I remembered. No sound woke me. When I opened my eyes, light was coming through the curtain seams. My body felt heavy in the good way that comes after long drives. I checked the time, stretched, and stood up. Nothing felt wrong. Nothing fell off. I packed quickly, wiped the sink, and left the key where instructed. I drove another 6 hours before stopping for food. While waiting for my order, I checked my phone. There was a message from the host. It thanked me for staying and asked a strange question. It asked whether I'd felt watched during the night. Not unsafe, not uncomfortable. Watched. I stared at the screen longer than needed. I assumed it was some kind of poorly worded survey. I did not respond. A few minutes later, another message arrived. This one included photos. The first image took a moment to understand. It showed a bed. The same bed. Same sheets. Same angle of light from the window. My body lay on top of the covers, turned slightly on my side, one arm bent under my chest. I was asleep. My face was visible. The angle was from inside the room, elevated like from a corner. The second image was closer. It showed my hand resting on the pillow. A small scar on my knuckle I had gotten years ago stood out clearly. The third image showed me later in the night. Shirt unbuttoned, shoe kicked off. The timestamps matched the hours I had been there. My food was called. I left it on the counter and walked outside. The parking lot spun slightly. I sat in my car and held the phone with both hands. My heart rate climbed in steady steps. I checked the image details again. Same date, same location. No signs they were taken after I left. I scrolled back through the listing photos. The bedroom images were taken from normal angles. No camera was visible. I zoomed into the corners. I saw nothing. I searched the room in my memory. The ceiling, the shelves, the smoke detector, the vents. I could not place where the camera had been. Another message came through with another image. This one showed me standing in the bathroom mirror, brushing my teeth, eyes half closed. The shot was from behind me, angled slightly downward. That meant the camera was in the bathroom, or above the door, or hidden somewhere I never thought to look. I contacted the platform support immediately and sent everything. The response came faster than expected. The listing was suspended. I was told not to engage further. My stay was refunded in full. I filed a police report once I reached the next city, sitting in a quiet station lobby while the images were printed and logged. The officer explained that cases like this were rare, but not unheard of. Devices could be small, wireless, hidden inside everyday objects. Hosts could access footage remotely or retrieve it later. Investigations took time. Accounts vanished before answers arrived. That night, I stayed in a chain hotel near the highway. I pushed a chair against the door. I checked behind the television. I covered the mirror with a towel. I slept in short bursts, waking every hour to scan the room. Each time I woke, my mind replayed the images with new details. The shadow near the ceiling, the angle that suggested intent, not accident. Over the next week, while finishing the drive and starting the new job, the messages continued. They came from different numbers, different usernames, the same tone, questions about my sleep, comments about how still I was, observations no stranger should have. I never replied. I saved everything. The platform confirmed the account had been removed permanently. The listing no longer existed. They said the host information was handed over to authorities. They could not say more. The messages did not stop. I changed my number. The messages followed to my email, then to a new account I had not shared. Each message included nothing new, only reminders that I had been seen, that someone had watched without being noticed. Weeks passed before the messages slowed, then stopped. Months later, a detective contacted me with an update. The host had been identified, multiple properties, multiple devices, storage drives recovered, charges filed. My images were among hundreds. The devices had been installed long before my stay. The house I slept in had never been lived in. It existed only for watching people pass through. I deleted the images after the case concluded. I still see them sometimes when I close my eyes. I finished the move. I settled into the job. I learned to check ceilings and vents without thinking. I learned that spotless does not mean safe. I no longer assume privacy just because a door locks. I booked the cabin because it was cheap and because it was far enough outside Asheville that it felt cut off from everything I wanted to stop thinking about. I had just ended a long relationship that had turned quiet and heavy in its final months. I wanted trees, silence, and a few days where no one expected anything from me. The listing called the place minimalist, quiet, off-grid. It showed wide shots of woods, a gravel drive, and a small structure tucked into a slope. There were no reviews that raised alarms, just people mentioning peace, cold nights, and how dark it got after sunset. The drive out took longer than I expected. The paved road narrowed, then broke into gravel, then dipped and twisted through trees that leaned in close. The GPS lost accuracy near the end, but the host directions were clear enough. When I pulled in, it was late afternoon and already dim under the canopy. The cabin sat low, half dug into the hillside, with a small porch and a single window facing the drive. Everything looked normal, old but not abandoned, maintained but not loved. Inside smelled like wood smoke and dust. The furniture was mismatched and worn smooth by time. A couch that sagged in the middle, a small table with one chair, a wood stove that looked used often enough. There was no television, no microwave, just a hot plate, a kettle, and a shelf of chip plates. My phone showed one bar that came and went depending on where I stood. That felt intentional, part of the appeal. I unpacked, stacked my hiking boots by the door, and spent the evening cooking pasta and listening to the wind move through the trees. When darkness came, it came fast. The woods swallowed the light beyond the porch. I locked the door more out of habit than concern and settled onto the couch with a book I barely read. The first sound came close to midnight, a dull scrape, low and slow, from somewhere beneath me. It stopped, then started again. At first it sounded like an animal moving under the cabin. The place was raised slightly off the ground, and I knew raccoons and groundhogs got into everything out there. The sound was heavier than I expected, but I told myself animals could drag things. I let it go. Around 1:40 a.m., it came back. Louder, slower, a long pull, then a pause, then another pull. The floor vibrated faintly under my feet when I stood. It didn't scuttle or scratch. It dragged. It sounded deliberate. I walked around with my phone light on, checking corners, pressing my ear to the floor near the stove, near the sink. The sound seemed to move, never in one place long enough to pinpoint. When it stopped, the silence felt tight. That was when I noticed the rug. It hung on the kitchen wall, a faded woven thing that didn't match anything else. I assumed it was decoration until I saw the edge lift slightly away from the wall when I brushed past it. Behind it was a door, narrow, plain, and set low, like it had been added as an afterthought. It wasn't in any of the listing photos. I was sure of that because I remembered thinking how open the kitchen looked. The lock on the door was new, clean metal barely scratched. The hinges were not. They were rusted and painted over, with layers built up like they had been there for decades. The wood around the frame was worn, scuffed by contact, as if something had rubbed against it many times. I stood there longer than I should have. I didn't touch it at first. I just listened. Nothing moved. The cabin felt smaller with that door in it, like a piece of the space had been hidden from me until now. I went back to the couch and tried to sleep. I kept the lights off, telling myself I was being dramatic. The woods outside were quiet. No insects, no wind, just that deep, empty silence that presses against your ears. The sound came back just before 2. This time it was right under the kitchen. A slow shift, then pressure. The door behind the rug bowed inward once, hard enough that the wood creaked. It didn't slam. It pressed, like someone leaning their weight into it to test it. I froze. My body went cold in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature. I watched the rug sway slightly, then settle. Whatever was on the other side didn't keep pushing. It waited. I didn't open the door. I didn't move toward it. I backed away and grabbed my keys, my boots, my phone. I stood by the front door for a long time, listening for footsteps, breathing, any sign that the pressure would come again. It didn't. Leaving crossed my mind, but the idea of walking into that dark with no cell service and a long gravel drive felt just as dangerous. I stayed awake until morning, sitting with my back to the wall, watching the kitchen. At first light, the cabin looked harmless again. The rug lay flat. The door looked solid. No marks, no cracks. If I hadn't felt it move, I might have convinced myself it hadn't. I sent a message to the host as soon as I had enough signal. Hours passed before a reply came through. The message didn't explain the door or the sounds. It didn't ask questions. It was a single instruction, clear and final, telling me not to open it. That settled something in me. It confirmed that the door wasn't decorative. It wasn't forgotten. It was known. I left the cabin that morning. I packed fast, didn't clean, didn't check out properly. As I loaded my car, I noticed scuff marks on the ground along the side of the cabin, leading toward the back where the slope dropped away. The earth there was disturbed, packed down in a way that suggested frequent movement. There was a vent near the foundation, bent outward, its screws stripped. I drove straight into town and found a place with reception. I called Airbnb support and reported what I'd experienced. They refunded the stay without much argument and flagged the listing. They told me someone would look into it. Weeks later, curiosity got the better of me. I searched county records and found the property history. The cabin had been built over an old root cellar that predated it by decades. The cellar connected to a shallow crawl space that extended under the structure and out into the hillside. There had been a police report years earlier about a transient man found living under the cabin, accessing it through a concealed door, storing stolen equipment and food below the floor. He had been removed, but the case notes mentioned damage to the structure and a recommendation to seal access points. The door in the kitchen wasn't sealed. It was reinforced. The new lock made sense then. So did the worn hinges. Someone had used that space for a long time. Someone strong enough to press against a locked door without breaking it. Someone who knew the layout well enough to move silently under the floor at night. The host never responded again. The listing disappeared within a month. I still hike around Asheville sometimes. I still rent cabins. But I never book places described as off-grid anymore. And when I walk into a room, I look at the walls longer than I used to. I notice rugs. I notice doors that don't belong. I trust the feeling that tells me when a space has been shared without permission, even if it looks quiet on the surface. I rented the apartment because I needed somewhere temporary and close to a hospital. I had taken a short contract job and didn't want a long commute. Hotels were expensive, and this place was cheaper than anything else nearby. The listing said it was a private studio in an older building, recently renovated. The photos showed clean white walls, a small kitchen, a bed near a window, and a bathroom with new tiles. Nothing stood out as strange. It looked empty, almost too empty. The building was 6 stories tall, concrete, built sometime in the 1970s. The outside was stained from rain and age. The front door used a keypad, and the hallway smelled like dust and old paint. The elevator worked, but moved slowly and made a dull grinding sound between floors. My unit was on the 4th floor, at the end of a long hallway with no windows. When I unlocked the door, the first thing I noticed was how cold the air felt, even though it wasn't cold outside. Not fresh cold, but still like a room that never fully warms up. The lights came on instantly. The apartment was quiet in a way that felt sealed off from the rest of the building. I walked through slowly. The floors were clean, but scratched. The walls had fresh paint, but you could see uneven patches where holes had been filled. The kitchen had new appliances, but the cabinets were older on the inside, with chipped shelves and faint stains. The bathroom was clean, but the exhaust fan rattled loudly and didn't seem to move much air. There was a closet near the entrance. Inside were a broom, a mop, and a vacuum. Nothing else. No extra towels, no supplies, no personal items. The bed had clean sheets, but no extra blankets. The window looked out onto another building only a few feet away. I could see brick, pipes, and a fire escape that didn't belong to my building. That first night felt normal enough. I unpacked, ate takeout, and went to sleep early. The mattress was firm and made no noise. The room stayed cold, even with the heat on. I slept lightly and woke up several times, but nothing specific caused it. Just a sense of not fully resting. The next morning, I noticed the bathroom mirror had smudges on the edges, like fingerprints that had been wiped away badly. I assumed the cleaner missed them. I wiped them off and left for work. Over the next few days, small things started to feel off. The trash bag under the sink was replaced once, even though I hadn't taken it out. The bathroom mat was slightly damp one evening when I got back, even though I hadn't used the shower that day. The air always smelled faintly like soap, even hours after cleaning. I checked the door lock every time I left. It always showed locked. The keypad had no record screen, just a green light when unlocked. I told myself I was overthinking. One night, I came back later than usual. The hallway lights on my floor were off, which hadn't happened before. I walked carefully to my door. When I unlocked it, the apartment smelled warmer, like someone had been there recently. The lights were off, just like I left them, but the air felt disturbed. I checked every corner. Nothing looked touched, but the closet door was not fully closed. I was sure I'd shut it. Inside, the vacuum had been moved slightly, turned at an angle. I stood there longer than I meant to, listening. I heard only the distant hum of traffic through the walls. That night, I placed a small piece of folded paper between the door and the frame before locking it from the inside. It was a habit I picked up years ago while traveling. In the morning, the paper was on the floor. I didn't panic right away. I tried to find another explanation. Maybe air pressure. Maybe I forgot. But I started taking photos of the apartment before leaving each day. The position of the chair, the way the bedspread lay, the closet door. 2 days later, I came back to find the chair slightly pulled out from the table. The bedspread had a crease across it that hadn't been there. The window latch was unlocked. I checked the hallway camera at the end of the floor. It was mounted near the elevator. I stood under it for a moment, then looked closer. The lens was covered with a dark film. thick enough that it couldn't record anything useful. It had been done deliberately. I contacted the platform through the app and reported that someone might be entering the apartment. The response was delayed and generic. They suggested changing the door code and checking with the host. The code change option was disabled. That night, I didn't sleep. I stayed in bed with the lights on, listening to the building. Around 2 a.m., I heard a faint sound from inside the wall near the closet. Not scratching, more like fabric brushing against drywall. Slow and controlled. It stopped when I sat up. I packed a bag and left the apartment before sunrise. Later that day, I returned with a friend and asked them to wait outside the building while I checked inside. The apartment looked normal, but with someone else there, I felt braver. I inspected the closet more carefully. The back panel didn't match the rest. It was thinner. When I pressed on it, it flexed slightly. Behind it was a narrow access space, just wide enough for a person to stand sideways. It connected vertically like a service shaft. There were scuff marks along the edges. Old and new. At the bottom of the space, there was a small platform with flattened cardboard and a bottle cap. At the top, a vent opening led into the ceiling. I didn't stay long after that. I canceled the rest of my stay and moved into a hotel. The platform refunded part of the money after several messages. The listing disappeared within a week. Months later, I searched the address out of curiosity. I found an old inspection report online mentioning unauthorized interior modifications and illegal access paths between units. The case had been closed after the owner agreed to repairs. I still think about how long someone could have been there before I noticed. How many guests came and went. How easy it was for someone to stay hidden in a place meant to feel temporary and safe. Now, whenever I stay somewhere new, I check the closets, the vents, the locks. Not because I expect something to be wrong, but because I know how quiet it can be when something already is. I booked the Airbnb because I needed somewhere quiet to finish a project. I work remote, and I was burned out from noise, people, traffic, and constant distractions. The listing was for a small house on the edge of a rural town, about an hour away from the city. The description said private, peaceful, perfect for focus. The photos showed a single-story home, light-colored siding, a gravel driveway, and trees on all sides. No neighbors visible. The price was low, but not suspiciously low, just reasonable. I arrived in the late afternoon. The road leading to the house was narrow and cracked, with weeds growing through the pavement. There were no streetlights. The house sat alone, surrounded by tall trees and thick brush. No fence, no mailbox, just a house and a small shed behind it. The place looked exactly like the photos, which made me relax a little. The lock was a keypad. It worked on the first try. When I stepped inside, the air felt heavy and slightly warm, like the house had been closed up for a while. Not a bad smell, just old air. I stood still for a moment and listened. Nothing. No hum of appliances, no distant sounds, not even insects outside. The quiet felt deep. The house was clean but plain. White walls, basic furniture, a couch, a small table, 2 chairs. The kitchen was stocked with plates and glasses, but no food. The fridge was empty and turned on. The bedroom had a bed, a dresser, and a nightstand. No decorations, no personal items anywhere. It felt less like someone's home and more like a shell. I walked through every room slowly. The bathroom was clean, but the mirror had faint streaks like it had been wiped down too fast. The shower curtain was new. The towels smelled strongly of detergent. The windows all had blinds pulled down halfway. When I lifted one, I saw only trees and shadows. I unpacked and made dinner as the sun went down. The house didn't change much when it got dark. It already felt cut off from everything. I turned on several lights, not because I was scared, but because the darkness outside felt thick. That first night, I slept fine. No strange sounds, no movement, just silence. The next morning, I noticed something small but strange. The kitchen chair I had used the night before was pushed fully under the table. I remembered leaving it pulled out. I assumed I pushed it in without thinking. I didn't give it much attention. I worked all day. The internet was slow but stable. The quiet helped me focus. Around sunset, I went for a short walk down the road. There were no other houses nearby. No cars passed. I didn't see anyone. When I returned, the house looked the same from the outside. No lights on. No movement. That night, I locked the door and went to bed early. Around 2 a.m., I woke up suddenly. I didn't know why. The room felt different, warmer. The air felt used, like someone else had been breathing it. I lay still and listened. Nothing. No footsteps. No sound from outside. I noticed the bedroom door was open. I always sleep with it closed. I got up and checked the rest of the house. Everything looked normal. The door locks were still engaged. The windows were still locked. I slept poorly after that. Over the next 2 days, more small things happened. The bathroom light was on when I got back from a walk, even though I knew I turned it off. The trash bag in the kitchen was tied and placed near the door one morning, even though I hadn't taken it out. The couch cushion had a dip in it, deeper than before. I started paying attention. I took photos of the rooms before leaving the house. I checked the locks more than once. I listened when I entered, standing still before turning on the lights. On the 4th night, I noticed the shed behind the house for the first time. I don't know how I missed it before. It was small, made of wood, partially hidden by brush. The door was slightly open. I hadn't been back there. I walked closer, but didn't go inside. The smell coming from it was strong. Sweat and something sour. That night, I didn't sleep much. Around 3 a.m., I heard a soft sound from the hallway. Not footsteps, more like fabric brushing against the wall. Slow, careful. It stopped when I sat up. I stayed in bed until morning. At daylight, I searched the house properly. Not casually. I checked behind furniture, inside cabinets, under the bed. Everything looked normal until I checked the hallway closet. It was empty except for a few hangers and a vacuum, but the back wall didn't feel solid. When I pressed on it, it moved slightly. I pulled the vacuum out and pushed harder. The panel shifted. Behind was a narrow space, dark and dusty. I turned on my phone flashlight and looked inside. There was a sleeping bag on the floor, used, flattened. There were empty water bottles and food wrappers pushed into the corner. The air smelled stale and human. I backed away immediately. My heart was pounding, but my head felt cold and clear. I grabbed my keys, wallet, and phone. I didn't pack anything else. As I opened the front door, I noticed muddy footprints on the floor near the back entrance. Fresh, leading toward the hallway. I left the house and got into my car. I locked the doors and started the engine. As I drove away, I looked in the rearview mirror. I saw movement near the side of the house. Someone stepping back into the trees. Not running, not panicked, calm. I didn't stop driving until I reached the main road. Later, I reported everything. The listing disappeared within days. I never heard back from the host. A week later, I searched public records for the address. There were reports of a previous owner arrested years earlier for illegally staying inside rental properties, accessing them through hidden spaces. The house had changed hands since then. I still think about how close I was to someone living inside the walls with me. How quiet they were. How careful. How easily I could have stayed longer without knowing. Now, when I stay anywhere new, I don't just check locks. I check walls, closets, spaces that don't make sense. Because I learned that sometimes the scariest thing isn't something unreal or impossible. Sometimes it's just someone who never left. I booked the place because it was cheap and empty on short notice. That alone should have warned me. It was a small house listed as a private countryside stay, about 40 minutes outside a mid-sized town. The photos showed clean rooms, neutral furniture, nothing personal. No family pictures, no decorations, no signs of someone actually living there. I told myself the owner probably rented it full-time and kept it minimal on purpose. I arrived just before sunset. The driveway was long and narrow, gravel pressed into dirt, with tall grass growing on both sides like it hadn't been trimmed in months. There were no neighboring houses close enough to see. The place sat back from the road, partly hidden by trees. It felt cut off in a way I wasn't used to, but I liked quiet trips and I needed rest. The door unlocked with a keypad. Inside, the air felt stale, like a house that had been closed up too long. Not rotten, just old air. I noticed right away how quiet it was. No distant traffic, no wind through trees, no insects. The kind of silence that feels padded. I dropped my bag in the living room and did a slow walkthrough. Everything was clean, but not in a hotel way. More like someone had cleaned carefully, but not recently. There was dust along the tops of door frames. The couch cushions were firm, barely used. The kitchen cabinets were empty except for one shelf that held mismatched plates and cups. No food, no spices, no trash in the bin. The fridge was plugged in, but empty and dry. The bedroom was plain. White sheets, thin blanket, no extra pillows. The closet door was closed. I opened it expecting hangers, but it was empty too. No smell of detergent, no scent of another person. It felt less like a rental and more like a stage space. I noticed the locks next. There were extra locks on every door. Not just deadbolts, but sliding bolts at the top and bottom of the doors. The windows had wooden dowels laid into the frames, so they couldn't be opened from the outside. That made me pause. I told myself the owner was paranoid or had dealt with break-ins before. There was a camera mounted above the front door on the outside. That was mentioned in the listing, supposedly only facing the driveway. I checked the backyard and didn't see any others. As it got darker, the house felt colder. I turned on the heater, but it took a long time to kick in. I made a simple dinner and ate standing at the counter. Sitting down felt strange, like the furniture wasn't meant to be used for long. Around 9, I realized my phone signal was weak. I could send messages, but they took time. Internet worked, but slow. I didn't think much of it until I noticed something odd on the router. There was a piece of tape over the indicator lights, carefully placed so you couldn't see when data was being used. I peeled it back. The lights flickered steadily, even though I wasn't streaming anything. I put the tape back and went to the bathroom. The mirror had faint scratches on it, like something abrasive had been wiped across it over time. Not enough to notice from a distance, but up close they were obvious. The shower drain had hair in it that wasn't mine. Long, dark strands caught in the metal. I told myself people are careless, even hosts. When I went back to the living room, I noticed the closet door that was slightly open. I was sure I closed it earlier. Inside were cleaning supplies and a folded ladder. Nothing strange, but the air in there was warmer than the rest of the house, like heat had been trapped. I locked the doors before bed, sliding every bolt into place. The sound echoed loudly in the house. I checked the windows again, all secure. Lying in bed, I couldn't relax. The mattress was firm and made no noise when I moved, but the house did. Soft sounds, not creaks, more like shifting pressure. Like someone walking very carefully, but too slow to be footsteps. I told myself it was the heater adjusting. Sometime after midnight, I woke up because the room felt brighter. Moonlight came through the window, but something else was different. The closet door in the bedroom was open. I had not opened it. I lay still listening. The house was silent again. I got up and checked. Still empty. No smell, no movement. But the air felt disturbed, like someone had just been there. I slept poorly after that. In the morning, I found mud on the kitchen floor near the back door. Dry flakes like they'd been tracked in and partially cleaned. The back door was still locked. The bolts hadn't been moved. That bothered me more than if something had been broken. I decided to leave that day instead of staying another night. While packing, I noticed something under the bed. A phone. Old model, cracked screen, turned off. It wasn't mine. I didn't touch it right away. I stared at it, trying to explain how it got there. I used a towel to pick it up and placed it on the table. There was no SIM card inside. No battery. Just a dead shell. I checked the rest of the house more carefully then. In the hallway closet behind the ladder, there was a vent cover that didn't match the others. The screws were worn, like it had been removed many times. I unscrewed it slowly. Behind it was a shallow space between walls. Just enough room for someone to press into. Inside were water bottles flattened and a pile of used paper towels. There was also a folded blanket that smelled strongly of body odor. Fresh enough that it made my stomach turn. I backed away and didn't check anything else. I grabbed my bag, unlocked the doors, and stepped outside. That's when I noticed the tracks around the house. Footprints in the dirt, circling, not leading to the road, just looping the structure. The grass near the walls was pressed down in narrow lines, like someone had been pacing there repeatedly. I got in my car and locked the doors before starting it. As I drove away, I saw movement near the back window of the house. Not fast, just a shift like someone leaning away from the glass. I didn't stop driving until I hit the main road. Later that day, once I had signal, I looked up the property again. The listing was gone. Not booked. Completely removed. I checked my reservation history. It was still there, but the host profile wouldn't load. I reported everything through the app. Days later, I received a generic response saying the matter was under review. A week after that, I searched the address online. There were police reports from years earlier about a man arrested for illegally living inside rental properties, accessing them through crawl spaces and wall gaps. He had targeted remote listings, especially ones rented shorter. The last report said he was released after serving time. No follow-up. I don't use remote rentals anymore. I don't stay in places where no one else is nearby. And every time I enter a room alone, I check under the bed first. Not because I expect to find something, but because I know now how easy it is for someone to already be there. I rented the Airbnb because I needed somewhere close to a temporary job site. The work was scheduled for 2 weeks, and hotels nearby were either full or too expensive. The listing described the place as a converted garage behind a family home. It promised privacy, a private entrance, and quiet nights. The photos showed a small studio with a bed, a desk, a kitchenette, and a bathroom. Everything looked clean and plain. The reviews were mostly positive, short, and vague. I arrived just after sunset. The neighborhood looked normal. Single-story houses, trimmed lawns, cars parked in driveways. The main house matched the photos. The garage unit sat behind it, connected by a narrow concrete path along the fence. A motion light turned on as I walked past the side yard. The garage door had been replaced with a solid wall and a standard door with a keypad lock. When I entered, the first thing I noticed was the smell. It wasn't bad, but it was strong. A mix of cleaning spray, old wood, and something damp underneath. The air felt thick, like it hadn't been moved much. The ceiling was low, lower than it looked in the photos. The walls were painted white, but the paint was uneven in places, with small ripples where it had dried over patched areas. I set my bag down and looked around slowly. The space was clean but sparse. No decorations, no personal items. The bed was pushed against one wall. The desk faced the opposite wall. The kitchenette had a mini fridge, a microwave, and a sink. The bathroom door was tucked into the corner. The only window was small and high, frosted, and faced the side yard fence. I locked the door and checked the bathroom. The towels were folded neatly, but they smelled musty. The shower drain had rust stains. The exhaust fan was loud and weak. The mirror had faint scratches across the surface, visible only when the light hit it at the right angle. That first night, I slept lightly. The mattress was firm and thin. I woke up several times without knowing why. The space felt sealed, like air didn't circulate. I assumed it was just unfamiliar. The next morning, I noticed the desk chair was pushed in tight against the desk. I remembered leaving it slightly angled. I told myself I was wrong. I left early for work. When I returned that evening, the unit felt warmer than expected. The air conditioner was off. The smell was stronger. I noticed the trash can under the sink had new liner. I hadn't replaced it. I stood still for a moment, listening. The unit was quiet. The main house behind the wall made faint sounds, but nothing unusual. I checked the lock. Still locked. Over the next few days, small details began to stack up. The bathroom light was on when I returned one afternoon. The bedspread had a crease running across it that hadn't been there before. The mini fridge door wasn't fully closed one night. Each time, I tried to find a reasonable explanation. I assumed I was tired. I assumed I forgot. On the fourth night, I woke up to a sound that didn't fit. It wasn't loud. It wasn't sudden. It sounded like pressure shifting, followed by a soft scrape. It came from the wall behind the bed. I held my breath and listened. The sound stopped. I stayed awake until morning. That day, I paid closer attention to the walls. The one behind the bed had slight discoloration near the floor. The paint there was newer. The baseboard didn't line up cleanly with the rest of the room. When I pressed on the wall, it felt hollow in one spot. That evening, I moved the bed a few inches away from the wall. The sound of the legs scraping the floor echoed more than I expected. Behind the bed, the wall had faint marks, vertical and uneven, like something had been leaned against it many times. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I noticed footprints in the dirt near the side yard fence, right below the frosted window. They were shallow but fresh. The fence itself had a loose board near the bottom. I reported my concerns through the app. The response came hours later and said the unit had no shared access and was secure. They suggested checking the lock again. That night, I placed a piece of paper between the door and the frame before locking it from the inside. I also set my phone to record audio while I slept. I woke up around 3 a.m. to a faint sound, closer this time. A slow dragging noise, followed by a soft thud. It came from the same wall behind the bed. I didn't move. I didn't reach for my phone. I stayed still and listened. The sound continued for several seconds, then stopped. The air felt warmer again, heavier. In the morning, the paper was on the floor. I listened to the audio recording. Most of it was silence. Then, around the same time I woke up, there was a low sound, steady and close. Not speech, not breathing, something shifting in a tight space. I decided to leave that day. Before packing, I checked the bathroom again. The exhaust fan cover was loose. One screw was missing. I stood on the toilet and lifted the cover slightly. Behind it was a dark space that didn't match the depth of the wall. It extended farther than it should have. I used my phone light. The beam caught on something reflective. Then another. Plastic bottles. Crumpled food wrappers. The insulation was pressed flat, like someone had been there often. I stepped down and backed away. As I packed, I noticed a faint smell coming from the wall behind the bed. Sweat and old fabric. I left the unit quickly and walked back toward my car. As I passed the side yard, I noticed the loose fence board had been moved. The dirt below, it was disturbed. I drove straight to a public place and contacted local authorities. I gave them the address and explained what I found. I also contacted the platform again and sent photos. 2 days later, the listing was removed. A week after that, I searched public records for the address. There was an inspection report from several years earlier citing illegal modifications to the garage structure, including an unpermitted crawl space between the garage and the main house. The case had been marked as resolved. I never heard back about what happened after I left. I don't know who was using that space or how often. I don't know if they were connected to the house or someone who found a way inside. What I know is that someone had access to that unit while I was sleeping. Someone knew the space well enough to move quietly. Someone counted on guests being temporary and distracted. I don't stay in converted spaces anymore. I don't trust listings that promise privacy without showing how it's secured. And every time I enter a room I don't know, I look at the walls first. Because sometimes the danger isn't something breaking in. Sometimes it's already built in.